Good evening, everyone. I have 6:03 and a quorum of voting commissioners present, so I will open up tonight's Conservation Commission meeting for Thursday, January 26, 2023, taking place in the Wacoit Meeting Room, Mashpee Town Hall, 16 Great Neck Road North. Broadcast live on local cable channel 18 and streamed live on the Town of Mashpee website. Before we begin, if you would please join me in a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I want to take the opportunity tonight first to welcome Ms. Sandy Godfrey, our newest Conservation Commissioner. This is her first meeting. Sandy, thank you for stepping up. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Great. Okay.
Standing ovation. I'm standing. Yay, welcome.
First, I would ask, under public comment, if there is anyone present or online that would like to make public comment to the commission for any items that are not listed on our agenda.
No one online.
No one online?
No.
Okay. All right, then I will dispense with that. We'll move on to the pre- and post-hearing agendas. Reorganization of officers for the vice chairman's position. I would entertain a motion to table that because we have two voting commissioners that are not with us this evening, and I would rather have a full representation for that reorganization. So if there's a motion to table it, I'd accept that.
Mr. Chair, I move to table the reorganization of officers to the next agenda.
Thank you, Brian. Is there a second?
A second?
Thank you,
Nope,
Marjorie.
Go.
Thank you.
That would be technically a second and a third.
Second and a third.
I'm just saying.
And is there any other discussion on that motion before I call for a vote? Okay. Roll call vote. Brian?
Yes.
Marjorie?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. I didn't miss anyone, did I? No.
No.
Motion carries. We have listed here approval of meeting minutes, but I don't see.
There's
it.
no minutes
Okay,
prepared
so-
yet for
Okay, so
approval.
we're good on that, all right. Do you want, Drew, do you want to move to the discussion first on water quality? Do you think that's appropriate, or should we open up the 6 o'clock hearing?
I think opening up the 6 o'clock hearing, just because that's what was scheduled.
Dispense with
as-
those?
yeah,
and-
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now calling the 6 o'clock hearing for James Whitney, NJCJ LLC, 21 Metacomet Road. This is for a proposed reconfiguration of a previously approved float and the installation of a pier section. Representative Falmouth Engineering Incorporated, and this is a notice of intent. And there's been a request to continue this hearing to February 9th, 2023 at 6:12. Public hearing notice was not published in the 1/20/23 Mashpee Enterprise. Is there a motion to continue the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you, Marjorie. Is there a second?
A second?
Thank you, Aaron. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I will call for a vote. Brian?
Yes.
Thank you. Marjorie?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So that'll be continued to February 9th at 6:12. Now calling the 6:03 hearing for Diane Wells, trustee, 28 Quaker Run Road. This is for a proposed construction and maintenance of a single-family dwelling, including a garage, deck, patio, in-ground pool, all associated utilities, Title V septic system, landscaping, hardscaping, pier ramp, and float. Representative Cape and Islands Engineering. And this is continued from 1/12/23, notice of intent. And I believe we've had a request to continue that as well. Is that?
Yes.
Yes.
So at the request of the applicant to continue the hearing to February 9th at 6:24 PM.
February 9th. 2/9, 6/12?
6:24.
6/24. Okay. I'll entertain a motion to continue that hearing.
So moved.
Thank you, Brian. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Charlie. Any discussion? Hearing none. Brian?
Yes.
Marjorie?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
I vote yes as well. So that will be continued at our next meeting, 6:24 PM. Now calling the 6:06 hearing for Mark J. and Melissa A. Winters, 112 Waterway. This is proposed demolition of an existing deck, construction of patio and pool. Representative is Falmouth Engineering Incorporated. This hearing is being continued from January 12th, 2023. It is a notice of intent. Good evening, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the commission, Michael Borselli, Falmouth Engineering, and I'm joined by Andrew Garrelli, the landscape designer for the project. I just had a question of procedural about quorum. What's our quorum tonight?
So we have four members present currently and a fifth member online.
Oh, we
through
have
Zoom.
one online.
Charlie.
Oh,
A
Charlie.
quorum is 4.
Okay,
Yep. So we
Thank
have
you.
more than a quorum present tonight.
thank you.
Sure.
So the voting members would be Brian, Marjorie, Aaron, Charlie, who's online.
Yep.
And myself as chairman.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to turn it over to Andrew.
Yes, at the last hearing, we talked about a couple of things that we wanted to have was some mitigation, which you can see I've added to the plan along the narrow part of the buffer to strengthen that up with 100 square feet for Inkberry. And I've showed in green where we've expanded in the resource areas. Also, I added a note that it's going to be a saltwater pool on there. And also, the note on the drainage, if the pool has to be dewatered fully, that it would be done by a pump truck. And I think the main thing that we were waiting for on the continuance was there was a motion to make one of the orders of condition was going to be no fertilizer, and I think we continued in order for you to check with the town attorney on whether or not you could do that, and I don't know what the result was of that.
We all set?
I think it was it.
Mike, do you have anything to say? No?
No, all set, thank you, Mr.
Drew, did
Chairman.
we hear from town council at all on that issue?
So before I reached out to town council, I went through the regs and bylaws.
Yes.
And determined that the commission, through its purview, just looking at the resource areas that are listed under the bylaw section and all the applicable regulations that deal with the values of this particular type of resource area and the buffer zone there too, and land subject to coastal storm flowage, that the commission does have the authority to condition this. I talked to other agents on Cape Cod just to run it by them. They agreed that this, while it's not directly tied to the project itself as far as the project scope, it still is under the interest of the act, and therefore a value that's protected, which is water quality. And so a condition of prohibiting fertilizer on a lawn deals directly with protection of water quality. So it is within the commission's purview to have this type of condition. But I did, want to make a note that if this is going to be a condition for this particular project, that the commission should most certainly be consistent with that moving forward in any similar situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let me open it up to questions from the commissioners, if there are any other issues or concerns that you might have based on what was presented 2 weeks ago and what we now have here tonight in front of us.
I just have the obvious one, Mr. Chairman, and when you were here last time and that was recommended, I don't think you had an objection to it, as I recall. And if there is no objection, it really shouldn't be a barrier. Am I correct?
Objection to?
You had no objection to the condition that was proposed by the commission, that there be no fertilizer used on the lawn.
I'll speak to that. I guess I'll go on record as saying I very much understand about nitrogen loading, and I would not be opposed to it. My only comment was that, it's something that should be a more general condition for all projects. Folks should find alternative means to, maintain their lawns than to, do the classic, nitrogen fertilizers on everything, high concentrations. We do have a nitrogen problem.
Yes.
And
If you've read the New York Times lately, they talk about it quite a bit. So I think that it's, one of the things that I'm trying to get from you is, it's really incumbent upon the Conservation Commission as the most important recipient of concerns of this nature for the quality of the water. To combine that with looking forward, and I'm sure you know, because this is your business, what's coming down the pike for septic systems, sewers, and all the regulation they're under, it just makes sense. And I think, I'm glad, Drew, that you went through that process.
Sure.
It looked to me as though it was permitted as well. But if, it would make things an awful lot easier and more cooperative if you could tell us here on the record that that's not an objection that you hold.
Well, that sort of puts, I'm not going to stand up and say, I think we should be allowed to do nitrogen lawns and fertilizers, because that's not a good thing. But
That's not a good thing.
But I also think that, if we said we don't want that condition and it was you deny the project because of that, you have the purview to condition it any way you want. So we're not going to, I'm just going to make the general statement that I agree that nitrogen loading's an issue and fertilizer is a contributing factor.
But the issue isn't nitrogen, it's fertilizer, period. And that, I think, is, makes it very difficult. I mean, there's plants back there other than lawn to have no fertilizer. And I understand that, but the thing that's difficult for me on this particular one, and not difficult, but that this is the first time that's being offered, and we literally have 0.7 square feet, well, no, that's not right. We have a very minor, little tiny triangle that's going to be, and in fact, I could change that to a planting bed. We're not expanding lawn, and this came up in a project that has really nothing to do with lawn, aside from the fact that there is an existing
That it
lawn there.
exists, yeah.
And so it just seems odd that this particular project would be called out for that. Having said that, I understand why, but I think it makes more sense that it would be nitrogen specifically, but
So just for the record, and I really appreciate you giving us your honest assessment here, because of the positions that you're in, you know that this is going to be something moving forward.
Yeah.
I think you understand that when the chairman and Drew mentioned that this may be a time, like you're saying, gee, why do we have to be the first? Well, you're not really the first, but in
Right.
the sense that it might be applicable to moving
Right.
forward. Somebody has to be.
but
And this is, my personal opinion as a commissioner, I think we would be derelict in our duties if we didn't start now. It's got to start.
Yeah.
It just has to be, and you have to, I hope, and I suspect you will be supportive moving forward, that you know that it's going to be something that's going to be universal.
The only difficulty for me is that I have a client that's not happy about it. And that's the difficulty for me. Not using fertilizer, I have no problem with that at all. But it's, we're expected to push back when something is not, if it's unusual and if it's something that's not in the client's interest, whether we agree with it or not. So that's the only reason why I bring it up
I
at all.
understand.
Our client's in the audience if he wanted to comment on it.
Oh, he certainly is.
Mr.
Welcome.
Winters is it? I don't know if he wants to.
Mark, are you on the line? Yeah.
This is Mark Winters. So just to understand what you're saying is, it's not just nitrogen fertilizer that would be restricted. It would be any fertilizer of any kind, even if it were organic.
May I speak to that?
Yeah, do we have the definition within our bylaws of fertilizer?
Yes, so, and I wish there were, kind of a greater level of clarity here, but I can only speak to what's the wording in an existing regulation that we have, which is Regulation 31, which is nitrogen loading and lawn standards. And under that regulation, there are allowances for use of organic fertilizers. It's very detailed regulation about the actual pounds of nitrogen containing, pounds of fertilizer containing nitrogen. It has to be of an organic variety. The nitrogen cannot be water insoluble, and it has to be applied at certain times of the year. So I can provide you, Mark, with that regulatory statute that deals with lawns that exist within wetlands jurisdiction. I don't, and this is just my opinion here because it's getting a bit convoluted at this point, that because that regulation currently stands as is, it's still applicable. And when you come up with a condition to restrict fertilizer on the lawn, there is still allowance by virtue of that existing language that you are indeed allowed to use fertilizer in accordance with Regulation
no
31.
objection to
That would be.
I just want to make that crystal clear.
That would
There's
be-
no mention of changing that regulation. The regulation currently stands today for the purposes of this hearing and therefore should apply to this situation. Yes.
And
I asked,
is that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Drew.
I asked that last week, I said, are we talking about the lawn standards? And the commissioner who's not here today, Alex, I think it is?
Alex?
She said, no, I mean all fertilizer. So are we talking all fertilizer, or are we talking
That's
about the
why
lawn
I said
standards?
it's getting a bit convoluted. I only have the ability to make this recommendation based on the existing language of a valid regulation today.
That's what I thought, that's what I was
Applies to
asking.
all situations. So in the absence of Alex being here tonight, I'm going to go with what's written into our current bylaw,
No
and that
objection to
applies
that
to
at
this
all.
situation. I don't know how much more I can expand or
that seems
explain on this.
appropriate.
Right,
I'm
that's
just
fine.
gonna
I would
leave
have
it
been
at
fine with
that.
that last time, too.
Yeah.
And I would think, just one more follow-up, everyone's been reading about the DEP regulation changes and the carrot and the stick, every system must be a D-Nite or do watershed. I think your towns are gonna go towards the watershed permitting, and I think the watershed permitting is gonna have policies about nitrogen loading with fertilizers and things that'll probably
Sure.
become stricter than what you even have.
Right, I would venture to, yeah, I would agree.
They're not
So
going to get
Drew,
loose.
my question is, my wife showed me some language last night, which I read, and it was almost a page, and maybe the regulation that you're referencing, that in great detail describes basically what I would call low-level nitrogen fertilizer that is allowed,
Correct.
and it's sort of community-wide.
That's correct.
So
It's, yeah.
I'm confused by, on one hand, you seem to be saying no fertilizer whatsoever, and the other one, I think you're referencing Regulation 31, under which it would be allowed. So is the commission making a recommendation, or is the commission enforcing this as a stipulation of the approval?
So in the interest of cutting through and kind of getting to the point of the reality of the situation, despite the wording originally presented for a condition on this project of no fertilizer usage on the lawn in perpetuity, is that our existing regulation allows for limited fertilizer usage with very strict conditions, and that's what I would recommend to the commission here tonight for the purposes of this hearing, that they institute that the lawn be maintained in accordance with Regulation 31. Because to restrict it outright, as was worded in the previous hearing, in my own professional opinion, flies in the face of Regulation 31. And unless the commission wishes to change the wording of that regulation, which at this time is just not possible, that be the actual conditioning of this aspect of this project. That it be in accordance with Regulation 31, which means
Okay.
you would be allowed to use fertilizer based on those conditions.
Regulation 31. I recognize that it's a very serious issue,
Yeah,
and we want to be environmentally responsible. We also don't want to be unfairly punished.
Sure.
So
Understood.
we want what's fair.
understood.
So if I could just interject, since I was just following up on the other commissioner's original concern last time. It's my opinion to the rest of the commissioners that Drew's interpretation is an accurate one, and that it, particularly for us, trying to deal with things that are in constant motion. The definitions are in constant motion, but unless and until it becomes something that is votable, we choose to do thus and so, we can only enforce not only what the language is under, is it 31?
31, correct.
31.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important, and I have great faith in all of the individual contractors and others, landscapers that we deal with, that you're clear how concerned we are about the issue. And I would just say, again, only as one commissioner, my preference would be that you don't use any. Alex's preference would be that you don't use any. Under 31, you may exercise your rights. Is that the owner?
Mr.
Mark,
Winchester.
Mark, is that? And Mark as well.
Yes.
To be fair. But as you mentioned before, it's not going to get easier. It's going to get tougher. You know that. And you're good people and you're good citizens. So I think it was important that we had this discussion, particularly since Alex isn't here. And she was very clear. She wanted it to be a complete act. And unfortunately, it cannot be. And I think I support Drew's interpretation.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? I'd like to take us back to the dry well configuration for the pool, and I know you stated that in the event of a total drawdown, the water would be taken off-site. Where do you anticipate drawing the line? What if the pool had to be taken down 3/4 of the way? Can we come to an agreement as to how much is too much for those dry wells? Because I don't see a groundwater elevation for those dry wells, nor do I see a capacity of those dry wells.
Okay. It's not a very big pool. It's 3 to 5 feet deep. It's 10 by 16. There would be, if the dry well's not taking the water, it's going to be obvious that it's going to back up. It's not going to drain. So at that point, for sure, you would go to the pump truck. I couldn't tell you how many gallons that would be because,
I recall from the last hearing, I went with a figure of 4, just to, even things off, 3 to 5, and we were looking at, I think, 4,800 gallons of water, something like that. I don't have those notes in front of me right now.
yeah.
My concern is that you're bringing in fill to raise up this patio so that the pool itself isn't going to go down into the groundwater, but I
It's to
don't
cradle the pool,
see, I
yes.
don't see a groundwater elevation on any of these drawings. So I feel a little uncomfortable knowing that there's 2 quick 4 standard chambers that are set into the ground, and I don't know where the groundwater is. And then if you're going to pump, say, half the pool, 1/3 of the pool, and this water is going to, I'm assuming, less than 2 minutes an inch, I'm assuming this water is going to take a straight shot right into the groundwater. And Regulation 25, under, critical characteristics and presumptions of significance, charges this commission with protection of groundwater. So myself, I'm not feeling very comfortable that the groundwater is going to be protected with, say, half of that pool being drawn down and injected into those 2 dry wells.
Well, let's say 1.5 feet of depth. I mean, the normal the normal lowering drawdown for winterizing is usually about a foot.
Right.
So, I mean, that's what that's for. It's just to draw down a foot. So we can say if they draw down 18 inches or more to get the truck, I'd think that would be reasonable. And it's 10 by 16 by a foot and a half, it's of 1 foot of depth. So a foot and a half from the coping down is already 6 inches is empty, so it's really just a foot of water. So,
Right, and also, it's a saltwater treated pool, so the water, this isn't chlorine, this isn't a chemically treated
Right.
pool.
I'm aware of that.
When you do the drawdown, if those, it's 2 minute per inch soil, I can tell you the water table is approximately elevation 1 by soil evaluations and percolation tests I've done in this neighborhood for septic systems. So the water table is about 5 feet below the ground. If you were drawing down a foot, you would be monitoring the drawdown. If the infiltrators appeared to be unable to keep up with the pump drawdown, you would stop and let it drain, and then you'd pick it up and draw it down a little bit more, if need be. So this is relatively clean. It's equivalent to the water. I mean, I would say if you tested that water, it's probably got better, it's cleaner than the water that it's adjacent to, as far as water quality for what you may be concerned with. It's not near a municipal well, it's not near a private well. I myself would not see a concern with drawdown of a foot or so into those infiltrators.
Any other questions or concerns? Charlie, you all set?
All set.
Thank you. Any questions or concerns from members in the audience and the public? Hearing none. Drew, do you have any closing comments or recommendations?
Only that, just based on the previous discussion regarding the lawn, that the condition be changed to adherence with Regulation 21, nitrogen loading and lawn standards. And also, just as a FYI update to the commission, this project is currently scheduled for a ZBA hearing, so they have not only applied for, but it's on their ZBA agenda.
Actually, the
It's
ZBA
last night.
ruled on this last night.
did?
And
Okay.
they said that all of their findings were tentative to the results of tonight's Conservation Commission hearing, the results of this.
But they satisfied our requirements for obtaining other permits,
They did.
applying
They-
for.
And went through the process, and the variance and special permit, I believe, was issued, again, pending
Sure.
the review here of the project.
Mr. Chairman, did they have any particular concerns on conditions for them to say, wait to see what conservation does on it?
I watched it on Zoom. I didn't attend the meeting personally. There was a lot of discussion about 1 step up, 2 step up to the patio,
No?
and sidewalk setbacks particularly, and again, this would have nothing to do with our
With us,
purview, but
no.
I believe it was the northwest corner, the northern boundary of the property. I'm going just from memory. I was just curious to listen to the hearing myself. But they made it very clear that their findings were dependent on how we roll tonight.
yeah, as always, yeah.
Yeah, have to be. Okay, anything else, Drew? No?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion from a commissioner, if there is one.
I am missing your recommendation. Oh, I'm sorry, Brian.
It's okay. I think I can try.
Oh, sorry, no, I was just going to say, I am missing your recommendation for some reason on my copy. I just want to make sure that you've stated whatever it is
I have,
you have.
yep.
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, Brian.
Okay, so the motion would be to close an issue for Mark J. and Melissa A. Winters at 112 Waterway with the condition of adhering to Regulation 31, nitrogen loading and lawn standards. Correct? Okay.
Good.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Charlie. I'll open it up for discussion amongst the commissioners. would like to amend the motion to have some language regarding the drawdown of the pool. I don't know exactly where we stand with that. Are we talking a foot? That was your agreement? No more than 12 inches drawdown, and then you
Of the
would,
water level, yeah, so 18 inches below the coping.
okay. So I would like to amend the motion to include that as well.
I think that's reasonable.
Second?
Thank you, Marjorie. Let me take, is there a discussion on that amendment? I will take a quick vote on the amendment to the motion so that we can then proceed to the motion itself. Brian?
Yes.
Marjorie?
Yes, sir.
Aaron?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
I vote yes as well. So now we have the original motion that has been amended to include the amount of drawdown of the pool.
Great.
Brian?
Yes.
Marjorie?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
I vote no. Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're through with the hearings. I think that's the quickest we've got through hearings since I've become chair.
There's, folks in the audience who, if you don't mind getting, nothing to deliberate, but just you're going to confirm the COCs have passed.
Okay,
I can get through very quickly if,
take them one at a time. Okay, before we go back to our pre- and post-hearing agenda items, I'm going to go through the certificate of compliance issuing that needs to be taken care of tonight. The first one is 609 for Eric P. Rothenberg and Pamela Eli, 18 Spoondrift Circle. Request for certificate of compliance, DEP number 433094, and the representative is the owner.
so no issues with this inspection. It passed the certificate of compliance inspection.
We're good with that one. Yep. The second one tonight was at 612 for Matthew F. McGinty, 31 Sand Dollar Lane. It's a request for certificate of compliance, DEP number 433030. Representative is the homeowner.
And again, this had no issues with the inspection. Inspection passed.
Okay, and the last one that we have is at 615, the 36 Summersea LLC, 36 Summersea Road, request for certificate of compliance, DEP number 433136. Representative is the owner.
Yep, and this certificate of compliance inspection also passed. We were just waiting on a signed contract for 3-year monitoring and maintenance of the mitigation plantings, which has been submitted, and everything is in compliance now at past inspection.
Perfect. Okay, so we're set with all of those. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go back to our pre- and post-hearing agenda items. The first on the list is a discussion of the Mashpee water quality issues and initiatives. This is going to be an ongoing discussion item. I know in our last meeting, there was talk about the New York Times newspaper article that came out on New Year's Day, and hard copy January 2nd. There's been an awful lot of talk regarding this article throughout many of the Mashpee boards and commissions. And I know, Marjorie, you felt as though this really falls directly in our lap, which, quite honestly, I agree. We're talking about the condition of the waters. And I think I'll just open it up to you first, if there's some follow-up you'd like to say, and then the discussion will go from there.
Great. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my fellow commissioners. I am really happy to see this on the agenda for a couple of reasons. One is there have been an enormous number of constituents, taxpayers, activists, and others who have reached out to me, and I know several of you, and they want to know what we're doing about it. That's generally the question anytime that you have an issue like this. So I thought that it would be important for us to give an opportunity under the open meeting law for folks to come and share their opinions. Number two, give us an opportunity to take a deeper dive into this. The article itself, I have a feeling I've talked to every one of you, except I haven't had a chance to, our newbie, our brand newbie, but I know you're very well-versed on the issues. And for us to take the deep dive to stand up for the town of Mashpee and for the Conservation Commission, as I mentioned to the chairman, I think we should write a letter to the editor or some sort of a commentary back. I think it should be fact-based, because the New York Times article just was repeating a lot of what was in the Boston Globe, and the Boston Globe repeated a lot of what was in the Cape Cod Times, and we all know. But what I also think is really important is all the good work that's been done by so many in Mashpee, all the other commissions, all the grassroots organizations, the work that's been done, lobbying, creating votes before the town on wastewater treatment and everything from the roads, the bridges, and how they impact everything from fertilizer. I mean, you know it better than I, most of you. So I wanted us to have a chance to defend the town and to say, nevertheless, we are taking this more urgently than I think. That's the only thing that I think was missing from the Times article. The town is taking it very urgently. The taxpayers are, the state is. These are thorny issues. And so I feel like we ought to take a stand and we ought to defend the town, but we ought to also look at prospectively what's coming down the road. And I think the open meeting option led to my second request, so I thank you for the time to just reiterate. I think we should be having a special meeting, and I think, Brian, you may have mentioned it in your commentary as well, of the commission, and invite all of the special interest groups. And there's special interest because it is a special interest. Everything from Mashpee Clean Waters to Papaneset Bay, these are two boards that I sit on or advise, and I know you all are involved with a dozen others. And I think we should have a special meeting and invite them to come in and tell us what they think. Tell us what their frustrations are, give them a chance to vent, but also give us a chance to hear their best ideas. There are great ideas out there, and if we form together in particular, and well, one example is the state should be funding this, the towns and the cities and the taxpayers, and I'm talking specifically about Mashpee. It shouldn't be put on the homeowners. There are homeowners that can afford to make changes that are coming about in the future. There are homeowners that can't. And that should not be the predicate for whether or not we help them have a better system for dealing with just in that one little area of what's covered in the article. So I would love, I don't know if tonight's the night, Mr. Chairman, to talk about it. I would love to hear what everybody else thinks, but I think, Brian, you mentioned, let's invite them in. They know a lot. Let's invite them to come and help us weed this through so that we don't miss anything.
So if I'm hearing you right, you would rather have our commission meet in, say, an off-week cycle, so that we're not dealing with any public hearings and
Exactly.
issuing orders of condition. We can just have a frank and open discussion with the various water groups that are here in town. I'd start to list them all off, but I'd leave somebody out, and I'd never hear the end of that.
That's why I stopped.
But there's got to be at least 5 or 6 of them. And would you also foresee having other regulatory boards represented in this meeting, such as planning or zoning, or, I don't know?
You know, it's just my personal opinion. I appreciate your asking. For the first meeting, I think we stick to conservation.
Sure,
It's going to
okay.
get messy enough, and it should. And we should have a separate meeting with all the other boards that have, we were talking about this earlier. The purview is really something that goes from black and white to very, very murky and gray, much like the waters in Mashpee, that who's in charge of what and who has purview. And it's really very often a matter of who's interpreting it at the time. This is why I'm grateful, Drew, that you took you took 31, but those moving forward, let's do it. That would be my recommendation. Let's do it. Conservation, all the groups, and there's well over a dozen.
So we would just call it a discussion roundtable. It wouldn't include any motions or votings, it's just open and
No.
frank discussion, just to
To
open up
submit written,
communication lines.
yeah, to submit written or verbal. Yeah, I don't think we need to concern ourselves an awful lot, other than your regular public meeting laws and Robert's Rules of Order and, you know, decorum and all that. What does everybody think?
Drew, do we have a schedule for this conference room that we could find a night that is open to plug in for that type of
Yeah.
a meeting?
Sure. Yeah, I can take a look at what the
Take a look
meeting
and see
schedule
what we've
is.
got.
Yep. Go through the town clerk's office, and they have a weekly,
Yep.
lineup of meetings and times that occupy the various meeting rooms around town hall. So if something here isn't available, there's also the library that may
Right, the
be.
event room at the library, I was thinking that, if we couldn't plug it in here, because the sooner the better.
Sure.
Is what I'm hearing from you, Marge.
It's what?
The sooner the better. You'd
The
like
sooner
to
the better.
get the
Oh, you
dialogue
know, I mean, it just is, I'll say one more thing and then I'll shut up.
No, it's a
Don't
discussion
tell me.
item. Right? Discussion, we're encouraging you to talk.
Yeah, don't encourage me too much, but, I think the number of calls that I've had on this, and I served in the legislature and I've served on national boards. This was a hot button that I was very proud to hear from so many people in Mashpee that I have no idea who they are. They tracked me down, probably tracked you down too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, oh, you, of course you know.
Oh, yeah.
Chairman, who's the chairman? What's his number? What's his cell?
You went away on vacation.
Well, I remember. So part of me was very, very proud of Mashpee residents, and part of me really reacted to some who said, how could this happen? And it's not that we were there 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it's that we're here right now, and it really is like it's what's going on in Mashpee. And we know that it's bigger, unfortunately, than that. It's the Cape, and some of the things that have come out since then have talked about the whole Cape. But it's urgent, it's so urgent, and I don't want to be the one on the commission to have to answer to my grandchildren who swim in those waters. And last summer, we're told they couldn't swim in 2 of them. And it was really horrifying, heartbreaking, embarrassing. So with that, I say thank you for whatever we can do.
Well, I think we all know that we are in crisis with the water. And when you're in crisis, you have to act. You can't just sit on the sidelines and wait and wait and wait. I've said this before, but I'll repeat it again tonight. We bought our home in Mashpee in 2016, and I have never in my entire career seen water go downhill as quickly as I've witnessed here. And again, it's not just Mashpee, it's the entire Cape. We have a regional problem, an extremely serious regional problem, and that was highlighted again. I sent an article to Drew today. I believe it was capeandislands.org had it. There's not a single embayment on the entire south coast of Cape Cod that is not degraded. In fact, I believe there's not a single embayment left on all of Cape Cod that is not in serious trouble. So something has to be done. My opinion is everybody is hoping and waiting and financing to the tune of millions and millions of dollars the wastewater treatment plant.
Yeah.
But I've said before, it is not a silver bullet. There are many, many, many things that we can be doing right now. No cost options, not a penny to anyone. And some of them just knock on the door of regulatory changes. You know, the setback, the buffers, the setbacks for that, fill in the floodplain, looking at Regulation 31, looking at, I believe, is it 107, Drew, the bylaw for the town for nutrient loading?
I believe so.
I think it's 107. I mean, we can be looking at all of these regulations and take a good look at them. Some of them haven't been updated for 25, 28 years. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm not driving a car that's 28 years old because it wouldn't work. And I think regulations that are 26 years old, well, I don't think, I know, look around, they're not working. So we've got a big rock to push uphill here. And we can't afford to not put our hands on that rock and start pushing. It's just got to happen.
I agree with you, Paul. I think that, I know I've spoken to some of my neighbors who I don't know how, but they, oh, I didn't know the waters were so bad. What are you talking about? You know? So I think it's good to get the other groups in, and maybe with everybody speaking to people about it, you know, some people are gonna wake up. And I think some of the, like fertilizer, it's something simple that people can do, and it's not gonna cost them a whole lot of money. You know, and they're all scared about the septic and having to change their septic, thinking, how am I gonna afford this? But I think if you give them, you know, some other alternatives that are less expensive and fairly easy to do, we have to do it. We
We have
can't
to.
just sit here and keep doing what we're doing.
One of the groups, that's an excellent point, one of the groups that we should have a roundtable with, and maybe not with all the citizens. Oh, I'm not talking in, you know, I'm so used to people telling me to be quiet. So one of the other groups that I think is really important for us to have in a roundtable discussion, but really, I'm not suggesting that we include them with the citizens' grassroots. They should have their own meeting. But our legislative delegation on Beacon Hill and in Washington needs to hear from us, not just in emails and Zooms. They need to come. And I know when I served, we came. More than 10 taxpayers called, showed up on an issue, particularly something as powerful as the Cape, the islands, and water. You add those three together, and our Beacon Hill delegation and our Washington delegation, starting with Congressman Bill Keating, who's terrific on these issues. And I have no doubt that he would come. But I think we have to proactively get them in front of us and tell them exactly what you just said, summarize what you just said, Mr. Chairman, but to say behind it what was intimated in all the articles and everything that's online, which is some of these issues are going to cost money. Some don't, and some we can do tomorrow, and they won't cost a taxpayer, but some of them will. And that shouldn't be the impediment, and that shouldn't be. And the state has money. I don't mind going on the record at a public meeting. The state and the federal government have not just millions, they have billions of dollars with a B to be allocated to individual cities and towns through their delegations in order to do a lot of projects. But the climate is right up there. It's very hot, it's very easy to defend, and it's very important that no taxpayer be denied the access to the clean water because of their inability to pay. So I'd like to make that suggestion.
Excellent. So can we agree that we would meet between meetings? Do you want to shoot for next Thursday? We meet on Thursdays. That seems to be good for us. I don't know if it would be good for the people we would like to have come and speak with us. And I don't know what the schedule is like for this room, but I'm just thinking Thursday would work.
Can I throw out a
Yes, sure.
suggestion or recommendation? I think that what it comes down to is, you know, let's not forget that the select board had, you know, a meeting with the regulatory boards in town that we were supposed to follow up on. I believe when select board member Sherman was the chair, previously to Chairman Whedon. And that never really happened. So, you know, the follow-up, I think the ownership, you know, has to fall on us as the Conservation Commission if, you know, the leadership in the highest board, you know, in the town isn't going to take this on. And then with that also, you know, if we're going to wait for them, like Marge said, going and writing letters to the delegation or seeing if the select board and the town manager, you know, could support that request and maybe getting on their agenda to send out those invites to make sure that we're all collaborating on the same page. But also when we have these meetings, to make sure that we invite our liaison, not the whole entire select board, obviously, but breaking it down so that one is, you know, with the town and the people. And then maybe if we look at and identify all the other regulatory boards that we were all in the same room with, to make them come to a subsequent meeting. I know that because of time constraints and things like that, it could be a little difficult for people sometimes, but I do know serving on the school committee, you know, we do have, sometimes we'll meet earlier. You know, our meetings might be at 5:30, but we'll meet together at 5 or something like that. So I think that's a recommendation and suggestion to throw out there. You know, if we were able to move our meeting time up, to say 5 or 5:30, that would give us at least 30 minutes. I'm not sure how many people would come in, because look, we're having a hearing tonight and there's not a lot of participation.
Right.
But then when we had a former hearing, you've seen everybody else in here, all the special interest groups, that were worried about that regulation and trying to stop us.
Was it
So I
a
think this
timing
is-
issue?
What was that?
Is that what you were saying? It was a timing issue?
The timing, yeah.
The timing of the meeting? Okay, no,
Right.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure I
Yeah,
was.
and then also, I think that it's just easier sometimes for people that want to log in, and that way we're being consistent versus, calling meetings outside. I don't want us to call a meeting and then, waste people's time. It's never a waste of our time, but, if we can just get more creative with calling the meetings before or after. I know that sometimes for me also, just the pre and post agenda items and then getting into a hearing, it's like sometimes we've sat here till like 9 o'clock, maybe, you know what I mean? But I just think that sometimes we're more creative and energetic in the beginning of our meetings. So, if this is really a hot topic, I think, we can at least dedicate and carve out, some time before meetings, if that's also a recommendation. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
So like basically, if I'm hearing you correctly, push back hearing times to allow for these hot topic discussions to happen so you can address them at the beginning of the meeting and then start the hearing agenda, say at like 6:30, 6:45, 7 o'clock or something
Right,
like that.
yeah.
That's, not a
Yeah.
bad idea.
I like that.
Yeah.
You gonna serve pizza?
Huh? Yeah.
Is there pizza? Yeah, don't get me started. I'll ask, where's the wine and the cheese? I'll bring the charcuterie board.
So as chair, I'll meet with Drew and Dan, and let's see what we can facilitate as far as getting these people in and having this type of discussion.
Great.
Again, but probably on an ongoing basis. This problem
be
is not going to
terrific.
go away overnight.
And I would encourage everybody sitting around this table to send, if we can, to you, to the three of you, actually, recommendations or suggestions for groups that we know that may not be as well-known that we'd like to be included. I think you actually created such a list about 6 months ago. Do I have a memory?
I may have, but I know I probably haven't covered all the groups in Mashpee.
Okay.
So, yeah, I would appreciate any
That'd be
input
great.
to that, so we have them,
Okay.
be able to reach out to as many as possible.
Just a question. Who
Yes.
is our representative on the Environmental Oversight Committee? I know I previously did. Are you Paul?
Yeah, I took
You are?
over for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which brings up, I guess we're in discussion.
Yeah.
The Environmental Oversight Committee has not met since Caitlin left. She was the chair.
Right.
And I believe the time has long since come that that group needs to come back together. But I don't know the proper procedure for calling the
Right.
committee to order when there is no chair. Would it be the select board that would do that?
Is there a vice chair?
I don't know.
I don't believe there was. No, it was only a chair position, and I'll have to.
You were on it, Drew, as well.
I was too, yeah, and I had asked for a leave of absence while we didn't have an assistant agent.
Right.
Because neither Caitlin and we didn't even have an administrative assistant either, so we both asked for extended leaves of absence as, to be perfectly honest, a straight-up lack of time to serve on another committee. But as far as procedures for getting the EOC started again, I mean, from my understanding, someone needs to step up to be the chair. It cannot be me. I don't have the
And
time
I'm
to do
already a
that.
chair.
So,
By default, you chair everything, Paul.
but I'll get more information on getting that started, because I know we've got a lot of interested parties, and I just unfamiliar with the procedure on getting the first meeting scheduled and,
Right.
those sorts of things. So I'll certainly gather up more information on that.
Top of the list.
Yeah, yeah.
Aaron, is there anything you would like to comment on before I change topics?
Nope, I'm just making notes because there are a couple groups, particularly with regard to Schustering Bay, that would like to be included, I think so.
Right, is it Save Shoestring Bay? Is that?
It might be,
That's
one
a
of my
great
neighbors mentioned it, I just want to make sure I'm
Right.
getting the right people on the list.
Right, okay. Charlie, I didn't mean to leave you out. Is there something you would like to add to the discussion?
No, I'm just sitting here listening.
A lot to listen to.
Yeah.
Okay, I know in your packet, there is a letter addressed to me and also members of the Conservation Commission from Evan Lair, Town Planner. And it's in regards to the expansion of the buffer zone from 100 feet to 150 feet. I believe you all have that letter. and Drew has provided a draft of bylaw 172-2 and 172-7 for our review. And I know the final draft of this, I was reading yesterday's iteration, and then this one came out again this morning. I mentioned to Drew, when you look at everything that's here, not just in the bylaw itself, but in the background, the current standards, how it's tied to Regulation 29, 25, even Regulation 31, you wouldn't think it's tied to, but there's numbers in there that are going to have to be changed. Not to mention mitigation, which we already did change, and we'll have to go back and rechange that as well. So there's not only a ton of work to do with the regulations, but and I don't mean this in the wrong way, but a lot of the commissioners are fairly new, and you're reading, you're looking, you're trying to figure out everything that you have before you. The binder is a little overwhelming. I've been in it most of my adult life, so I don't find it that overwhelming. But I wanted to at least open up these articles to get your take on it. I'm not inclined to entertain any kind of a motion tonight on these. I would rather default that to our next meeting. But at the next meeting, I certainly would be looking for some fairly serious content input from all of you. And again, I'm going to repeat what I said. When you're in crisis, you can't sit around and wait. I was very disappointed last October. I got it. I understood exactly why those warrant articles needed to be tabled. You don't want to go to town hall and miss the boat, so to speak. But I am not at all understanding of waiting much longer. I would like to see these things come forward, the sooner the better. But I'll wait, and I'll listen to what everybody has to say tonight. And I'm going to encourage each and every commissioner to do your homework. It's been a while since I've said that to my high school students. But there's a ton here to do. I still go back. I look at things. I had Regulation 25 open tonight when I was talking about that swimming pool under characteristics, critical characteristics, and presumption of significance. So there's a lot here, and I'll just open up that for a brief discussion as well.
Can I ask,
Yes.
have other towns on the Cape done this or extended to 150 feet? Is there anyone we could look to who's accomplished this?
I'm not sure what other commissions have done for their regulations in terms of widths and extensions of
So-
buffer zones.
When this was first brought about, conceptually, or as a suggestion, it actually came from the Mashpee Department of Natural Resources through their consultant, Fuss & O'Neill, who's hired to oversee the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant, which the town qualified for. And so part of that grant was to look for opportunities to improve water quality conditions through regulatory review, which we've been doing also through the subcommittee, and so that's been ongoing. And one of their suggestions was to look at the bylaw buffer zone of 100 feet and expand it. Originally, I think the thought was to 300 feet and then work back down to 150, because 300 would just entail yeoman's work and a mountain of things to look through and consider. So 150 was more reasonable starting point. So no other town on Cape Cod has this. Both Dan and I are attending monthly network of Cape Cod Conservation Agent meetings through Zoom, and I just know from my familiarity with all of the other Cape towns that no other Cape Cod town has more than a 100-foot buffer zone. There are 3 towns that were identified in the Fuss & O'Neill draft language and their research. Dover, Watertown, and Brookline are 3 towns that do have a 150-foot buffer zone. None of those towns border the water, border the coast, but nonetheless, they have those established buffer zones. They've also come up with their own bylaw forms to reflect jurisdiction in those 150-foot buffer zones, which we would certainly do as well, and I've collected up all of those documents from Brookline so far. I'm still waiting to hear back from Watertown and Dover, but I have the information from Brookline, which I'd imagine would be similar from the other 2 towns, so it's good to have that documentation from the agent in Brookline. So, yeah, to answer your question, this would be the first on the Cape. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's my hometown,
Brookline,
yeah.
Tom Brady is the name of the agent there.
Is that the name of the egg?
Yes, it is.
Oh, I didn't know that. I think they still own the property in Brookline, don't they? Pretty sure, even though
Oh,
the other
maybe,
Trump, the other Trump.
I think when you look at Table 29.1 and Regulation 29, and you look at the setbacks, starting, I believe, at 15 feet
Yeah,
and working
it's
up
up
to
there.
650 feet, not that anybody has that for a setback,
Right.
it becomes very clear when you start thinking about wildlife and you start thinking about natural filtration of vegetation, how critically important it is that we extend these buffers out.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's a no-cost feature.
Yeah.
There will be people that will say, well, you're going to preclude me from being able to build a house on my property. But in the explanation, as it's contained in this draft, it is extremely clear, it is crystal clear that this does not prevent somebody from coming before this commission with a proposal that we could be able to mitigate and work with those people. It's going to be tougher, and as you said earlier, Marjorie, it should be. This is going to be a tough haul. Nothing's easy
That's
about
the
this.
future, it ain't gonna
Nothing.
be easier.
And everybody's got to play a role and a part.
Could I follow up on your question and ask, since you have studied this more, I have gone through it several times. I happen to be predisposed to like it, and I'm looking forward to knowing the best way to lobby town meeting voters is to say, who's our opposition? Who's the loudest? Who's going to come forward and go, oh, God almighty, don't do this. They're a bunch of lefty pinko wackos or whatever. You know, I'm using extraordinary, exaggerations. But who's our opposition?
Do you want me to, from my own experience, I've heard from probably more folks associated with the real estate industry than anyone else. And then subsequent to that, homeowners who have talked to real estate agents or vice versa, real estate
they've
agents
scared
who
them.
talked to homeowners based on what they had interpreted as the consequences of this buffer zone expansion. And I say all of this with the understanding that the initial explanation that accompanied Fuss and O'Neill's, draft language was severely lacking in very, important points as far as, what the repercussions would be, an expanded explanation. And so this sort of campaign of not fully being informed spread out from there to, various homeowners. And then we started getting feedback from real estate agents and homeowners saying, I'm not going to be able to build a house. If you do this, I'm going to lose revenue. I'm going to, just sheer panic. And so that was obviously the driving force to withdraw initially, go back to the table and look at providing a much more substantial explanation, which that's what we've been working on ever since that moment. And we're meeting every Friday with myself, the Board of Health Director, the Planning Director, the Building Commissioner, and Director of Natural Resources, all of us getting together every Friday morning for at least an hour, if not more, to discuss all of these initiatives cross department lines. Didn't matter whether we shared jurisdiction or not, just to bounce ideas off each other. And we've been doing that since the moment this was withdrawn from that town meeting, consistently every week. And in the meantime, working on our own documentation, draft language, and discussing, when should we roll this out? How should we get this out to the public feedback, and just coming up with a game plan to educate, inform, and spread the word, so that, no one can come back and claim, I never heard this, you never reached out to us, those sorts of things, which you hear quite commonly in any given town meeting. And, some of it may be true and some of it may be exaggerated, but we just want to make sure that that becomes it is a key aspect of this whole initiative of the draft language.
And it has to be a campaign. I mean, it has to be.
Well, it does, yeah. You
get
want
the
to do
word
as
out.
much as you can to roll it out, just like you were discussing earlier, having a separate commission meeting to, address the special interest groups and get everybody to the table. It's the same philosophy.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
really right in line with that.
Well,
And getting everybody out and activated to get off their fannies and come in and vote.
Yeah,
right now, there's, the select board has an ongoing water quality item on every agenda. The planning board, same thing. Conservation, same thing. I see the chair of the planning board is here, and she's working her way up to the microphone. So about to hear from her. But
We're going to shame you into representing the entire town.
before she speaks, I'll finish up by saying we have 3 forums right now, and all 3 of those are meeting in public. They're being, television's on right now. They're being
Yeah.
broadcast, the newspaper's here. Short of putting posters at the grocery store windows, I don't know what else you can do. Start making phone calls, and the job is rolling out. It's begun. And I know between now and May, that's a semester.
Yes, it is.
If somebody can take a graduate course and finish it, I don't see why we can't finish this job and
We
get
have
to
to.
town meeting and get these articles the attention they deserve to get us out of crisis, at least begin.
I just wanted to that
Yes.
point real quick before Mary goes, just remind people that, we have open town meeting. And, with that, let's not forget that even if it passes, they can make a motion to reconsider by the end of the night. So let's take example for in the past. Okay, we were all on the same page when it comes to wastewater. Now, that vote passed, but if you remember a few town meetings ago, the plastic water bottle ban. It passed at one meeting, then there was all this noise about it, so then they brought it back at the subsequent meeting, and then they repealed it. So I think that, when we talk about, the campaign and stuff like that, we really need to be mindful of that. And then also to the point, is it to our advantage to do it in May or October, with also looking at, some of the seasonal residents, because that plays a big factor also too. There are seasonal residents who do reside outside of, the town predominantly, in the winter months and so on and so forth, but they are still registered in the town. So in May, you might see a lot more people coming back. We also have, elections in May, would the fall be, different if, not so many people were around. I also think that it depends on what the hot topics are. So, it's really going to require us showing up and getting all the people that support us to also show up, but also stay throughout the end of the night and make sure that we're on top of it, at the next town meeting or anything else. But then there's also citizens petitioner articles that can be sponsored by any citizens. So we're not sure, what citizens might be putting any kind of opposition to some of this stuff and things. So I think we really need to be strategic, with our approach, so.
And
Can
the
I-
deadline for that is?
February 14th is the
13th.
deadline. Huh?
13th,
13th?
the Monday.
We'll know soon.
Monday,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Can I ask a question real quick? I'm sorry. I just wanted to see, has there ever been any outreach to the Association of Realtors from the town conservation to talk about these issues? Because being
Not
a
to-
Realtor, I get information from them, and they have tons of opinions on stuff like this. And I'm just wondering, have we ever come together and chatted?
No, not my term.
No, we've reached out to, and we've had meetings here with landscape associations. I've attended a number of different neighborhood association meetings to go over the wetland, regulations and bylaw and jurisdiction, but no, not to a real estate group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just wondering if that would, when you mentioned opposition, I would just wonder if that would be
Yeah.
an enormous organization to get on board with this idea. and
Are you
explain the benefit.
volunteering?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll volunteer for whatever you like, but I just think it would be really important to get these 2 people, or 2 groups,
Yeah.
industries, or, in the room
Yeah.
together. 'cause-
And I didn't mean to paint a picture that it was all real estate agents.
Yeah, no,
like, if
I'm
that-
not saying you
But
were.
it's, but in correspondence with certain real estate agents that have called and expressed concerns over, the proposition of expanding the buffer zone, the first thing I do is invite them to a meeting and please, please, please bring it before the commission during the public comment period that we have at every single meeting we've ever conducted. And even if you can't make it in person, you can make it by a Zoom. And that's always been my first response in every single conversation I've had, is you have the opportunity to bring this before the commission and raise your concerns directly at a public meeting. Please take advantage of that. And to date, I really haven't seen anyone that I've spoken to come in and take advantage of that. There's been written correspondence that's been submitted, which is fine, and, I'm happy to see that, but I think it would be better to have, in-person or, remote attendance if they have serious concerns. By all means, bring them before the commission. Happy to hear them.
Good evening. Could we have your name and
It's a good
address for the record?
segue. I'm Mary Wagon, 35 Ashumet Road. I'm also the chair of the planning board, and I'm pleased to see that you're discussing these issues tonight. Personally, and this will be no surprise to anybody that knows me, I'm in strong support of regulations that reduce the nitrogen and phosphorus pollution into our waters and increase the buffer zone to any type of structure or development. As chair of the planning board, I'm pleased to report to you that we have a standing item, just like the select board, about water quality. And just by a brief background, just so there's no confusion, we did talk in November about possible zoning bylaws for a May town meeting. It was kind of a lackluster conversation, no action, no vote, just kind of piddled out. But then came the New York Times article and the branding of Mashpee as a toxic stew. And I got phone calls and input from constituents saying, this can't wait. So I went to the select board and I made public comment offering the planning board's help if the select board went forward and wanted some zoning bylaw changes. Last week, Drew came to our planning board meeting on the 18th, January 18th, and with our town planner, Evan Lair, really set out a nice plan. I encourage everybody to watch that meeting. It's January 18th Planning Board. They did an excellent job putting forth a plan, which is basically, and Drew, correct me if I'm wrong, 1, Concom regs, 2, Concom bylaws, 3, zoning bylaws, and in that order. And I was so excited to hear that the Concom regs, and I know I'm not citing them correctly by their right name, but those things are under your control and can happen the fastest, before May town meeting. So I was thrilled to hear that. So this proposed plan, was supported by the planning board 3-2. I don't have the minutes of that meeting at this time, but I don't think that we voted to, recommend that nothing go on town meeting, at May town meeting. That I don't think there'd be any zoning bylaws at May town meeting because we wanted to see other things go forward first, including Concom regs and Concom bylaws. Zoning bylaws are not as powerful as the tools that you have, and that's why. Zoning, if you change the setback, and Tom Fodala and Evan Lair will correct me if I'm wrong, but if there is a new lot, a lot in existence, and you then change the zoning bylaw with respect to setbacks, the previous setbacks are kind of grandfathered. So they're just not as powerful as your regulations and your bylaws. So anyways, as the chair, if you find you need support from the planning board, please let us know. I'd love, and I've spoken to the chair of the select board about reconvening the regulatory boards to talk about this and to allow discussion. At that meeting, the last time we convened, discussion was not allowed. And then we were supposed to have discussion at the next meeting, and then COVID peaked, and it never happened again. I think that you're going to find that a lot of the regulatory boards are going to give you tremendous support on these efforts, and so won't town residents. As you know, the planning board is updating the town's local comprehensive plan, and we did a survey. Hasn't quite been released. It's been released to planning board members. But question 4, and maybe some of you took that survey. Question 4, which of the following are the most serious problems facing Mashpee today? And it talks about population growth and traffic and town services and affordable housing and food security and schools and mental health and the quality of open waters, groundwater, and drinking water. That was a question. And that by far was the number one serious concern of the town. There was 620 respondents, 63%, or 381, marked that as the most serious issue. Okay? They said they had that as very serious. 149 said serious. So in total, 88% of the respondents said that quality of open waters, groundwater, and drinking water was very serious or serious. And by far, it outranks every other concern in town. So I'd say let's go for it. If we get the right people to come out, if we engage the right people, we'll be fine, and they will be engaged because the elections are in May. So that's my 2 cents.
That data is very similar to the same expressions that we heard in all 4 of the workshops, whether it was
Oh,
build
yes.
systems or any of them. Everybody, the top of the list, when I looked at all those boards that were set up, it was all water quality.
Yep, so we had
So it's no
5
surprise.
workshops. Dan, you're new, so but anyways, we had 5 workshops. One of them was virtual, and there wasn't a workshop that the water quality didn't come up prominently. So,
Well, thank you.
all
Thank you for
right,
waiting.
thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Would you like to speak? If you can have your name and address for the record.
Good evening. Is this one on?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I think either one are, yeah.
Good evening, Raul Lizardi from Cape and Islands Engineering at 800 Falmouth Road. Our office is for Cape and Islands. So I'm just here just for some clarification and maybe just question to see some of these topics have been discussed or initiated in the process of this expansion of the 150-foot buffer. I haven't done consulting work in all the towns in the Cape, but none of the towns that I've done, which is probably more than 10 towns in the Cape and some additional towns off Cape, I've never had a bylaw that expands the buffer zone to 150. They'll all stay with the Water Protection Act 100-foot buffer. But if the buffer zone is expanded for jurisdiction purpose, that's fine. We just need to know exactly how this affects our projects, how we address them, how we advise our own clients and property owners. So one of the questions I had is because we face this in this town. Mashpee does have an extended jurisdiction, just slightly. The coastal bank for Mashpee, at times, is extended beyond the coastal bank from the Wetland Protection Act. It's fairly minor because it's only a 1 foot in elevation increase. So it's the difference between the Wetland Protection Act jurisdiction and the Mashpee jurisdiction in that case is not much of a difference. It does become a big difference on inland banks. We had a project off of John's Pond where the inland bank, per the definition of the Wetland Protection Act, is the high water mark or the first observable break of slope. And we had a defined inland bank. For John's Pond, it's fairly simple to define because there's been an elevation established for the pond, which is the high water level of the pond, and that establishes the inland bank. If there's no other shoreline wetland associated with the pond, the 100-foot buffer jurisdiction line for a Wetland Protection Act filing, notice of intent or RDA, is 100 feet. We had a project where the Mashpee Inland Bank extended another 45 feet landward of the DEP Inland Bank. That in itself extended the Mashpee jurisdiction line another 45 feet by the same. Now, if this gets extended to 150, properties across the street get included in that jurisdiction, and it's fine if that's the intent of the bylaw. Now, what is an applicant supposed to do for projects that only fall beyond the Wetland Protection Act jurisdiction and only fall on the local bylaw jurisdiction? Will there be a different filing? Will there be different filing fees? The filing fees are based on the schedule from the state. When it's notice of intent, half of that fee plus $250 goes to the town.
$12.50, yeah.
And half of it minus the same amount goes to the state.
Right.
if we have a project that's only in the Mashpee jurisdiction beyond the Wetland Protection Act, what filing is required, what fees will be required. I believe the local fees will be the same, probably not much of a difference, but what filing is going to be prepared, what permit is going to be received for that. So I think there should be some thought on that, because just putting it forth in the town meeting and suddenly it gets approved, and then we have no mechanism of providing a permit for those particular projects that don't fall under Wetland Protection Act. I have not done any work on those 3 towns that are extended buffer zone or jurisdiction lines, so I don't know what they've done. But Mashpee does have an extended jurisdiction. It's just, for the most part, it slightly coincides much with the Wetland Protection Act, so the filings we've been doing are the same: state RDAs, state NOIs, so we know what permit we're getting, we know what jurisdictions we're in. The extended buffer, an extra 50% of that jurisdiction could bring in a lot of properties and a lot of development that could just fall under this local Mashpee jurisdiction and not the state. And will there be a distinction for those type of projects? We just have to make sure in the consulting community that we understand what we're advising our clients, what we are going to be presenting and preparing applications for.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So in terms of what you're saying, I mean, these are properties that are few and far between, correct?
Well, for the most part, the coastal waters, the difference is minor.
Minor,
It is a
right.
50% increase in jurisdiction. Probably some properties across the street that would have never had to file probably would now file. On inland conditions, it is more impactful, especially because there is that inland bank. The inland bank in Mashpee is not just the water bodies. An inland bank could be to a freshwater wetland.
Right.
No water, but actual wetland. And if the slopes are 25% to a cranberry bog, then, and if that 25% doesn't stop till like 100 feet beyond the edge of the wetland, and you extend another 150 feet, you're bringing in probably a whole community into the conservation jurisdiction that by the state would not be in the Wetland Protection Act jurisdiction. But I mean, if that is the intent, we just need to know what we're going to file and how we're going to advise our clients on this. The inland bank is really the one that probably extends. I don't know if Drew has seen this before, but we've seen it in a few projects, and it's usually around inland wetlands, inland bodies of water. Not really rivers, because the 200-foot riverfront area just takes quite a bit of chunk of land. But it's mostly those wetlands and water bodies that are inland that there is an inland bank associated, and then you tag on an additional 150 feet. Because the inland bank for Mashpee, it's any slope that meets 25%
Yeah,
whenever
one of
it's
four.
within 100 feet of any wetland.
Right.
So you could have a pond, a flat land, but before the 100 feet is done, between 90 and 100, you have a slope of 25%. That's a Mashpee inland bank. Then that drags another 150 feet of jurisdiction around John's Pond, around Ashumet Pond, around much of these ponds. That situation
Well,
happens a lot.
Currently, the top of inland bank under Mashpee's definition of inland bank carries a 100-foot zone of jurisdiction.
Right.
So you're talking about adding an additional 50 feet, not 150 feet on top of the 100 feet.
Right, but the inland bank happens to any landform that's within 100 feet, 100
Oh, yeah,
feet
yeah,
within
understood.
the 100 feet of that wetland.
Right.
And then that adds another 100
Right.
feet to that inland bank.
Yes.
So the state jurisdiction would have stopped at 100 feet from the state inland bank.
Right.
If another Mashpee inland bank happens in that 100 foot, there's another 100 foot
Oh, I see what you're
today
saying. Right.
to that one.
Right. Yes, yep.
And now we're talking about 150 and 150.
My comment would be more to Drew than to you. In a situation where all of a sudden we find ourselves with a overextended reach of jurisdiction, wouldn't it be feasible for the engineering company or the applicant or both to ask for a waiver of that overextended, and then the commission could look at and say, gee, you know, we've already picked up, you know, like another 85 feet more than we really need, and there would be grounds to issue a waiver.
You could do that, or what I was kind of thinking in regard to that situation, that scenario, there's also land subject to coastal storm flowage as well, that you have an exemption built in for those types of resource areas, so that a waiver wouldn't even be necessary. It's just simply this 150-foot, or rather 50-foot expansion of the 100-foot buffer zone may not apply to those particular resource areas, given those circumstances. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, it's just an idea to float out there as opposed to a waiver request.
Sure.
Both, I think, are viable opportunities to look at, but certainly a very good point to raise, and, you know, certainly we want to make sure that we're not sending out, you know, in the event that this gets approved, and just having no guidance forms, things like that, for consultants to follow. So that is why I specifically requested bylaw forms from Brookline as an example to go off of, that these would be bylaw filings, because this is a bylaw change. So that would be the approach in terms of actual permit applications, that we would have expanded bylaw forms to fill out for this type of scenario. Yep.
Yeah, that's good information, because I think if the intention is 150 feet, most everybody thinks of the Wetland Protection Act, 150 feet from what the Wetland Protection Act, because if I understand correctly, the idea is to increase what the Wetland Protection Act asks for jurisdiction, which is 100 feet,
Right.
to make it 150. So maybe if this revision of the bylaw is to add or to increase our buffer zone to 150 feet from the Wetland Protection Act, wetlands resource areas as defined in the Wetland Protection Act.
Right.
So that what that does is it takes out 150 feet from the Mashpee Inland Bank, and it takes out 150 feet from the Mashpee Coastal Bank, and it takes out 150 feet from the land subject to coastal storm flowage.
Right.
It only adds 150 feet to the wetland resources from the Wetland Protection Act. It still adds 50% increase of jurisdiction compared to the state, but it doesn't have this chain reaction of some of those already extended resources locally in Mashpee.
Yeah, understood. It's a good point to raise. Certainly something that we need to think about moving forward if this does become, you know, a promulgated change. Yeah, the other thing too, while we're on the subject of land subject to coastal storm flow, and this is something that I had picked up in reviewing the existing language of the bylaw, as you can see in this section here, 172-2 jurisdiction, coastal storm flowage is listed as a resource area, right? You can see that.
Yes.
Now, when you go into Regulation 25, land subject to coastal storm flow, it specifically states the 100-foot buffer zone does not apply to this resource area. So that's something we're also going to have to look at in terms of the existing language here compared to a regulation that kind of says, no, this actually doesn't have a buffer zone, even in its current iteration of 100 feet. Well, it says it here that it does, and then you go in the regulation, it
So we
says.
need housekeeping in
You need
25.
housekeeping, yeah. And certainly anywhere in the regulations where it's reflected, the 100-foot buffer zone is specifically stated, you're going to need to update that accordingly, you know, based on how we work out wetland resource areas compared to actual wetlands under the Wetlands Protection Act. So I thank you for bringing that up. It's a very important point. In terms of rolling this out and making it feasible and understandable for everyone to follow, because you don't want to put it out there and then have no subsequent guiding documents and, you know, procedures accordingly. So, yeah, good point.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I actually put some of the update, I moved this
Yeah.
discussion of the buffer zone up under the discussion of water quality. That was my mistake. I guess we're okay with that.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. Would you like to comment on recording documents and plans? I know we
Yeah,
spoke
we'll go
about
back.
this before.
Sure. So we had been just having a discussion just in office, conservation office, sometimes, when we go back and look at permit history, when somebody's buying a property or a real estate agent is looking into the history of a property, or consultant says, I want to have the permitting history on this property, I'm getting ready to do something else with it for a client. In any of those scenarios, it pops up every now and then. We can't find plans, either in the registry of deeds or in our own records. So we just felt it would be a good housekeeping measure, as right now, it's required to record all of your orders of conditions, or if the commission requires an RDA that happens to be conditioned in an unusual circumstance, that could be recorded at the registry of deeds if the commission deems it necessary. And then any orders of resource area delineations for any of the commissioners who aren't familiar with that, anyone can come in and request what's called a request for resource area delineation. So it doesn't mean they're proposing a specific project. They're asking the commission, by virtue of this request form, which is usually filled out by a wetland expert or a wetland consultant, to go out to a particular property and delineate the wetlands. And then the client can get a picture of, okay, what am I dealing with here? And does the commission agree with this delineation? That's what an order of resource area delineation is. And it gets recorded at the registry of deeds, so it becomes fact rather than, theory or, opinion. Right, exactly. So in those types of documents, the accompanying plans we want to require that the plans get recorded along with the permits. And I think it just makes sense, just for, even if it's being redundant, that we have, plans in paper files, and then eventually they get scanned in our own in-house scanning software, just to have them also be required to be recorded and scanned at the Barnstable County Registry of Deeds. I think most other towns' commissions already do this, so I think we should just make it a housekeeping thing
Absolutely.
moving forward. It's nothing you need to vote on, it's just kind of an FYI, and I think it just makes sense, so.
I would think that would benefit the real estate people.
It would benefit
too, when they
everybody,
do
the
title
homeowners,
searches.
everyone involved.
Yeah.
These are
The
documents.
worst thing is like coming up, to a discovery that you can't find a plan and reflecting, and someone's asking for a certificate of compliance. They're like, I got nothing to go on other than what it says here in the permit. And if it makes reference to a plan, I have nothing at all. And then we have to require a whole new plan, which is at significant expense.
Yeah.
Someone who's just looking to close out a project and isn't even proposing anything anymore. So that, it goes just as well to benefit the property owner as it does to everyone else. So we're gonna make that, we'll send it out to all the consultants and make sure that they're aware of that. Do you want me to?
Yes.
Do you want to know that? So updates, Red Brick Road culvert, we just had a meeting this week with Horsley Witten Group, and we're now moving to request an official cost estimate from Horsley Witten for the planning and permitting stages for the construction of a box culvert to replace the existing failed culvert at Red Brick Road. And this will also include some additional stormwater capture, because anyone who's come down either side of Red Brick Road knows that the road slopes down towards this low point where the culvert is. So we want to do some stormwater capture and remediation before the water hits this low point in the road. And then there will be some additional cost estimates in the event that the road needs to be raised higher than 1 foot, which is the current proposal, because that will involve some additional wetland impacts. So the cost estimate will include that contingency as well. Upper Quashnet Restoration, finalizing the permit level designs for permitting phase. So that's coming to a close, and we should start seeing the actual permitting process for the restoration of the Upper Quashnet. And I will have Horsley Witten come in and just do a kind of presentation again, because we've had a lot of commission turnover. So some of you may not be as familiar as others as far as what's happening there in the Upper Quashnet. It's similar to Choptik, only it has a river instead of just a isolated bog. There's a river running through the middle of the bog complex, and this is more river restoration than wetland restoration, but it involves both. But similar setting, cranberry bog that's been abandoned. Moving on to some bylaw review subcommittee updates. At the last meeting, you were all provided with the final draft versions of the wetland fee schedule, which is Regulation 5. And I didn't receive any comments since the last meeting about these revised permit fees. They're nothing too aggressive. It's generally an increase of an average of $50. And then, of course, the after the fact is doubled. So if there's no other input, I would say just use this next gap between meetings to provide any additional feedback that you may have. And my intent would be to have this posted for public comment on February 9th. And then after that, if there's no changes from public comment or it's not necessary to have any additional meetings, then the following meeting, the second meeting in February would be promulgation of these changes. So if anyone has anything they want to raise now or between now and the next meeting, feel free to bring that
So
up.
if we're cool, there's no need to do anything at this point.
Yeah, yeah.
I just wondered, the after-the-fact filings, is
Mm-hmm.
it possible to make those, give them a little more teeth? You know, make it triple instead of, to kind of encourage asking for permission instead of forgiveness kind of situation?
I mean, it's you'd want to have a discussion amongst all of you to, have that discussion, but that's your, it would be your decision ultimately as far as how much an after the fact, I don't think it's a bad idea. It's,
I encourage people to
yeah,
follow the
All the
guidelines the
rules.
first time.
right.
Because
Around,
it's not like they're rare. We do get them.
We get them. We get them quite a bit. And, so I don't see any, but, maybe that can be a discussion. I mean, feel free to discuss it now if you want, but.
Did that move from 150 to 3? Did we double that?
Which one?
The after the fact. It's at 3
It
here.
just doubled whatever the existing fee
Right.
is for each
Okay.
category. Yeah. Yep.
Do you want to think about that and we'll discuss it at the next meeting?
Sure.
Or do you want to? Yeah.
I just thought it might encourage people to, follow the rules. and
Sure,
all that
sure.
first time.
Yeah. Nobody likes to pay double already, but triple would be an entirely different level.
Yeah.
Are those two meetings back, the notes?
What's that?
Is it the original notes that you distributed to us?
Yes.
Was that two meetings ago?
I think it was.
Yeah, okay.
Or maybe I think it was the last meeting that I sent.
I'll find them.
I'll send them out again. I'll send out
Yeah.
the original with the notes and then the clean revision, which is what you see up on the screen now.
Oh,
So
okay,
this
good.
has all of the
Yeah, it
changes
just seems to all make
incorporated.
sense to me.
Yeah, it's been 11 years since we've touched them, so that's a long time, probably longer than.
Why don't you like quadruple a couple of them just to see if anybody's reading?
It's a good litmus test there to see
Yeah.
who's actually reading it.
All right, if you, first time, $150. After that, it's about $3,000.
Well, there you go. Gotta take it seriously.
Do it on time.
Yeah.
So now we have, and I think that before I get into this, probably warrants another meeting of the subcommittee next week, just to kind of go over some of the input from the health agent regarding, this is Regulation 30. So this is
Yeah.
a regulation that this is going to be impactful and very meaningful moving forward when it comes to nutrient loading and prevention of pollution. So this is all centered on overall, alterations that involve potential nutrient loading, whether it's from on-site septic systems, stormwater runoff, and fertilizer usage. All of these, contributions to nutrient loading to water bodies and wetlands. So as you read through, under this section here, this is Section 1, Definitions and Jurisdiction, and you've got jurisdiction here that has the specific scenario. So reading through, it states the jurisdictional areas, which are your typical wetland resource areas. Subject to this regulation is any alteration as cited in Section 9A of Chapter 172, which is altering, filling, dredging, those sorts of alteration categories, occurring within areas of jurisdiction as cited in Section 2 of Chapter 172. So 172-2 lists the actual resource areas that are protected under the Wetlands Protection Act. Such alterations subject to review under this regulation would include, but not limited to, any construction or additions to dwellings, construction, or upgrading of septic systems. And this is the key part right here in quotations, and this is existing language that before this regulation was rescinded. If the septic upgrade is to accommodate increased living space. And then it goes on for other types of alteration, construction of impervious surfaces, driveways, patios, swimming pools, et cetera, and lawn areas. So this is a section where I wasn't quite sure from our last subcommittee meeting if we were okay with this wording or if we wanted to add in more specific scenarios, broaden it. we didn't really, we kind of talked about it
Undecided, I
undecided.
believe.
So that's just something we need
More hung
to,
up on parts.
the parts per million, which I think I've gotten from Zach that I've plugged in and looks good. So we're just going to have to go back and reconvene over this.
Yeah, I think it's like a half an hour.
I would
Bang
imagine.
it back and forth, we'll be there.
Right. So this whole definition section is entirely new, and it just highlights, provides definition of words that are commonly used in reference to this regulation in the regulation language itself. So people can have a clear understanding when they see these terms, what exactly they mean. Critical characteristics and presumptions of significance. So going down under this category to 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph down. So in this regulation's first iteration before it was rescinded, it was an existing regulation under Chapter 172. So it was promulgated previously. And most of the language that you see here is what previously existed. The reason it was rescinded is because of the threshold that was put in there as of no more than 5 parts per million as an achievable threshold that you can't go over for all sources of nitrogen and phosphorus, or nitrogen specifically, loading. A thoroughly unrealistic and unachievable standard. So we had to yank it and then come back and look at it and see how can we fix this to actually make it feasible and enforceable. So that's kind of the background as to why this regulation was pulled, looked at, and now is being repromulgated based on these revisions. So these are the performance standards that we came up with in consultation with Zach Seabury, our new Board of Health Director.
Is that his real name?
It is his early.
That's great.
He's very knowledgeable. He's a great guy, and he's really enthusiastic on working with our department and other departments in dealing with wastewater issues. So in talking with Zach and the previous health agent, Glenn Harrington, trying to come up with and establish what we feel is a reasonable and achievable goal for nitrogen loading. And the consensus opinion was 19 milligrams per liter, they're interchangeable terms, contributing to freshwater bodies and groundwater. Now, the question I'm sure some of you have is, well, how do you measure this? How do you calculate this out? There is a calculation sheet. It's an MS Excel worksheet that's interactive. So you plug in the numbers, the square footage of hardscaping, the loading expected from the type of septic system that you're putting in. This was developed by the Cape Cod Commission, and it originally accompanied this regulation in the beginning, and there's no reason why it shouldn't continue to accompany it moving forward. There's been no change to this form over time because it's pretty straightforward. So when a development or alteration is occurring, whether it's just hardscaping, it's a combination of hardscaping and septic, or it's lawn, hardscaping, and septic, or any combination of those potential nutrient-adding activities, the worksheet is used and the calculations are run, and if they come out to more than 19 parts per million, go back to the drawing table and figure out how to get below that threshold. So it's going to have some pretty significant impacts as far as development on properties moving forward. Most prominently, the type of septic system that they have in place. And as we all know, what's coming down to Marjorie, you mentioned this earlier, that DEP is coming out, rolling out this anyway. So this is just in the meantime, and will be, once DEP's Title V regulations come into effect, everyone's going to have to achieve as low a parts per million as they can to meet the TMDL standards. And then there's some additional wording here about phosphorus loading. There's no real great technologies out there when it comes to septic systems that deal with phosphorus, because phosphorus binds to sediments. It's not like nitrogen. So really, this is just wording to try and put out ideas to reduce phosphorus loading. More educational than any really strict standards. There are septic technologies out there that involve what's called permeable reactive barriers, or you've maybe heard the term biochar before. These are just organic materials that intercept the wastewater and allow the phosphorus to bind to these sources of carbon, basically. So that's how phosphorus is removed. The problem with permeable reactive barriers is they involve substantial excavation and they don't last forever. And when they run out, of their capacity to bind nitrogen, phosphorus rather, you have to dig it up and replace it all over again. So the logistics and the feasibility of long-term phosphorus removal using that technology is still quite a long-term away.
How long do they last when you say they don't?
I think it was like 6 to 7 years, something like that.
6 to 7?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought you-
Yeah.
okay.
So not even close to.
And two on the use of
And the use too, so it depends on what sort of
Roads along
wastewater
the-
flow.
Yeah.
Some may only last a couple of years, some may last twice that long, depending on the nature of the flow. So that's really hitting on the main points of this regulation. And then there is, in this section C here, for some of the more impaired water bodies, and how do you really say which is more impaired than the other these days? But you know that Schustering Bay is in really rough shape compared to Pompanesett Bay. The further upland you go, the more nutrient loading is concentrated before it dissipates out as it gets closer to the coast. So in some of the more impaired embayments, and I would say those would be associated with the Wacoya Bay watershed, because those are all designated areas of critical environmental concern. So you've already got a higher environmental standard stamped on those areas currently. And so here is where the commission says the commission may set a reduced standard range of 5 to 18 milligrams per liter nitrogen loads emanating from alterations on lots in any jurisdiction for those types of receiving coastal water bodies that are likely to suffer unacceptable effects from pollution at a level of less than 19 milligrams per liter. So for areas that are around ACEC designated, which is all of the Wacoya Bay and its sub-embayments, Hamlin Pond, Jehu Pond, Great River, and Little River, all those areas that are currently mapped as areas of critical environmental concern, that's where this range would come into place, at the discretion of the commission, depending on the project. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, not everything applies to every single situation, just like any other reg.
Right.
But that's really the gist of this, and so we only have that one part to work out about septic system and what sort of scenario of septic systems upgrade would require, upgrading to an IA system. So in like an instance, just to throw out there as an example, someone's got a cesspool. They're willingly going in and upgrading it to a Title V. Should that require an IA system on top of that? Septic system failure, have to go fix it per Board of Health authority. Does that require an automatic IA upgrade? Increase in flow, brand new development.
I saw
Do
that.
those require IA? I would say yes. The other one's kind of questionable. It's not immediately apparent. So that is what needs to be worked out in this regulation.
Right.
Or anything else that you see that you may have questions on, but that's,
It's feasible, though, that the question might be answered for us with the DEP
This is true.
regulations. By the
It
time
might.
it's true.
we get a failed system.
And in recognition of that, maybe it's not, maybe there might be some leeway there. But again, it's just going to go up for discussion, so. So if you have any questions on that.
We could be ready with this one as well by
Yeah.
next time around.
Yep. I'd really like to roll this out sooner than later.
Is that the timing that what's the timing on this?
Next meeting.
Next meeting to have public comment as well as any comments from the commissioners.
Yeah,
We would
okay.
advertise in the paper for public comment on both sets of regulations. And then if, let's just say there are no substantial changes, there are minor modifications, but in the absence of any substantial change, it would go to town council for his review of the language in its final iteration. And then depending on the timing of his feedback, the next meeting or the meeting after that would be actual promulgation, and that would also get advertised in the paper, just like public comment.
Okay.
We would put the regs up on the website, have hard copies available, get the word out to the public as much as possible, as you want to do in any sort of regulation amendment process. And then barring any unforeseen circumstances, go to promulgation as the last step.
And they're effective immediately.
And they would be effective immediately, yep, yes, yep. And none of these require any form changes or, permit forms. These are all still in line with the umbrella language of the bylaw, so everything would remain the same as far as procedure, with the exception of that nitrogen calculation form that anyone any applicant would have to fill out to make sure that that range is achievable. So it's a little more work on the consulting application end, but a very straightforward form and easily workable.
Do
So,
we have to commit those formulas to memory?
no, it'll all be in writing. They're the ones that'll be responsible for it.
I think you knew I was being facetious.
I appreciate everyone's patience with this, too. It's a lot of
That's fine.
material to go through, but just put it on your priority list to review the bylaw expansion and
Yeah.
these two articles for the next meeting for public comment.
Do your homework.
Yes, you got homework assignments.
I'll send out reminders.
And Johns Pond, Santuit Pond, Milfoil, I did send out correspondence today to all the commissioners. Documentation on, from the consultant about what they are putting forth as far as how to address the milfoil and bladderwort and overgrown elodia, which is actually a native form of aquatic pondweed on Santuit Pond. So they've got a whole kind of approach detailing how to deal with that. It's, yeah, and it's expensive. It's going to be, I didn't request nearly enough money for the scope of what they're proposing. It doesn't mean that that's what we're going to follow through on, but just so you can read up on it and see what they're suggesting.
Would there be an interaction between that and alum if they were to do
I don't know, that's a good question. I would
that?
need
Can't
to,
major, but
yeah, I don't want the pond to like explode or anything, because we're putting in too many mix of chemicals and, yeah. Yeah, I think it's, might be a mad scientist situation. Right, no, absolutely. No, we would want to make sure that we're not making the pond worse, you know. Toptic bog restoration, the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, MEPA. Review is in process and should be wrapping up. Once that's completed, you'll start to see the preparations for a notice of intent before you as a commission for the restoration of the Chopchick bogs. And then there will be some other levels of permitting after your review. If it passes, that would go through the state and federal Army Corps of Engineers, and then we're anticipating construction hopefully right around this time or January of next year to actually start construction, which I'm really excited to finally see something moving along towards fruition in its original timeline, which is great to see that. So exciting stuff there. No new updates on the local comprehensive plan. I think everything's being wrapped up and getting ready to be rolled out now with all the surveys completed. Still figuring out, I'm still talking to other people and kind of getting together all of the possible land acquisitions that would be a priority. And then I can send out first meeting dates for our first meeting of the Land Acquisition Subcommittee. But I'm still getting together the list of parcels that we can discuss and prioritize. Mashpee River Woodlands Trail modifications, I'm sending out an RFP again, and I did hear from Tom Bunker, because I brought this up at the last meeting. He said he never received it, and he would be interested in doing this. This is the
really?
rerouting of the mountain bike trail
Yeah.
and the switchback, and Eversource is requiring a surveyed plan for that, so we'll,
I feel like
you know,
this has been on the agenda for 10 years.
it's been a while.
Doesn't it
It's
feel
been a
like
while, and
This is-
it's partly me for not following up.
Standing headline, that's what you
It's-
call a standing head, right? My God.
But now that I'm getting through some of the, top priority items, this is floating
This is
closer to the top.
floating.
It was down at the bottom for a while, it's finally
Yeah, I
coming up to the.
know, well, they must be happy.
Yeah, yeah. And we do have the new tours out for our February 2023 nature tour schedule. Herring Warden.
They all look so good. I'm sorry to keep interrupting.
No, it's okay.
They all look so good. I wish I could
leads
do
the
more.
tour?
Yeah.
Keep going. I'm sorry.
Renee Fadala is her name. She's our staff naturalist, so.
Really
She knows
nice.
her stuff. If you haven't been on a tour with Renee, you're missing out.
That's what I heard,
It's
yeah.
awesome.
Oh, we're gonna go.
Yeah, you will learn a lot of new things, and it's always very interesting. And I think she's starting to do tours now of the Charles River Restoration, which is something, if anyone hasn't seen yet, you got to get out there and see that, because that's
it's
really
quite
amazing.
something to see.
Oh,
It's
wow.
amazing. Yeah, the transition. You look at old satellite maps of the bogs, and you look at that area today, it is just a completely different landscape. It's unrecognizable from what it used to look like before.
One more growing season, and it ought to be
Yeah,
quite something.
yep.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
So Renee's starting to do tours out there as well. And last is the herring warden update. So Dan and I are working with the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe, Jason Stiding and the Natural Resources Department to schedule an annual herring run walk for the Mashpee River. And then we try to hit as many areas of the upper Quashnet and Santuit rivers as well, just to pick up any trash or debris and check for any major blockages for herring runs, because believe it or not, by the end of next month, you start seeing herring coming up the rivers, and with the warm weather we're having, I wouldn't be surprised if you started seeing scouts right now. It's just the water temperature is already just below 50 degrees, which is what triggers the runs. So I think the runs are going to be very early this year, and I hope it keeps raining so we have enough water to attract them upriver. So that's in progress, and I think we've got some ideas for Earth Day this year that Dan is working with the Recreation Department, coming up with some possible activities there. And I think that's, and we're going to table the vote of endorsement. Did you mention that already for the?
What are we tabling?
So this communications correspondence,
Oh.
DNR director requested a vote of endorsement.
Okay.
Oh,
good.
okay, yeah, we haven't done that yet. So they're moving forward with the article for the restriction on horsepower on Santuit Pond. This has been brought before the
Right.
select board a couple of times, solicited public feedback, and so the DNR director is looking for a vote of endorsement by the commission to, for this article.
Yeah.
And we wanted to wait till the next meeting, just so we have a full quorum for presence of commissioners.
And
to take
that's
that.
another spoke in the wheel of water quality. I know Ashley was there with a couple of the consultants at the select board meeting not the last meeting, but the one before that. They gave a wonderful presentation. It was very clear what they were trying to
Great.
get out. But there was a group of voters from Santuit that just are dead set against it. So you have to get out and
Wow.
make your points.
There was one other item too, and I'm just looking at it. I'm trying to put this down, maybe I thought I had put this in here. Oh, it was under the heading of Mashpee water quality issues and initiatives. And I think I'm pretty sure I'd sent this out to everyone, that Meredith Kilpatrick had requested to have this documentation provided to the commissioners just to be aware of her concerns on, and not just her concerns, but the general concerns about the 59 cesspools that have been identified as being
Oh,
within
right.
100 feet of a water body in the town of Mashpee. So just some background on this. This was something that was mandated by the Board of Selectmen to the Board of Health to identify all areas of cesspools around Santuit Pond, and I think town-wide cesspools in general, but focusing on Santuit Pond within 300 feet of, or within 300 feet of water bodies in Mashpee, basically. And 59 were identified being within 100 feet of a water body in Mashpee. Now, as far as which ones have been, there's varying levels of compliance as far as which ones have been upgraded, which ones have been pumped out, and which ones haven't achieved compliance at all yet. So it kind of varies across the board there. But one important point of distinction is Meredith, in my correspondence with her, she's of the belief that cesspools are enforceable under the Wetlands Protection Act. Now, under a specific scenario, they are. And under other scenarios, they're not, and I'll explain what the difference is. So there's two different forms of pollution in general. There's point source pollution, which is a direct discharge of pollution that you can visibly see into a wetland or a water body for the purposes of wetlands jurisdiction. And then there's what's called non-point source pollution, which is your storm drains that go into the groundwater and dissipate through the ground, your septic systems, your cesspools that dissipate into the groundwater and aren't immediately visible on the surface. So that's what's called non-point source. Fertilizer and lawns, anything that kind of leaches into the groundwater and collectively contributes to a water body is generally considered a non-point source of pollution. Anything that you can see that's physically discharging, whether it's runoff, spurting out of a pipe into a river, those sorts of things are point source pollution. So in general, cesspools are considered non-point source pollution, just like a septic system, a Title V is as well. if a cesspool gets backed up to the surface and becomes flow on the surface and then starts to discharge that flow into a wetland, it becomes enforceable under the Wetlands Protection Act. Because the Wetlands Protection Act, you can only enforce point source pollution as a violation. Okay, I'm not saying non-point source isn't subject to the Wetlands Protection Act, it is. But in any instance that you're trying to make a case that this is a violation of the Wetlands Protection Act, regardless of what sort of resource area is involved, you have to connect A to B. And you can't connect A to B by the presence of a cesspool that isn't backed up to the surface and overflowing on the land and clearly discharging into a wetland. And I've explained this to Meredith, and I understand her frustration, and her points are very well taken, and they're valid. But the reality is that the Board of Health is the primary enforcement agent entity when it comes to septic violations, and they're the enforcers of Title V under Massachusetts DEP regulations. So for our purposes, we really, it's always a case of a burden of proof to show that this is causing an adverse impact. This situation is causing an adverse impact, and here are the specific observations and reasons why it's causing that impact. And if you can't make a clear case and connection between the two, enforcement can be very problematic. So I think that's why there's a difference between non-point and point source pollution as far as enforceability under the Wetlands Protection Act. So just wanted to bring that up, and if you want to have a discussion on it, but that's really the primary concern of Meredith is that, these cesspools are out there, they're at varying levels of compliance. What's the deal? Why aren't we taking a pretty obvious situation that's not a good situation and dealing with it? And I think this goes towards, having these group meetings with other groups and identifying things like this and saying, okay, what are we doing about this? Who's taking the lead? Who's got the most authority in this situation? And what do they need to do to increase compliance? So just to put that out there.
I thought what you sent out yesterday or today was elucidating. It really was, to know the difference between the two causes and what qualified and what didn't.
Right.
And I think that's what most people just want to know. Are you guys just ignoring this, or
Right.
is this really happening?
Yeah, it's something the public can easily look at and say, why are you guys not dealing with this?
I thought that was good, yeah. Well,
No, it's definitely something that needs to be discussed more, and so people can understand. And maybe it is a loophole in the Wetlands Protection Act. Maybe the Wetlands Protection Act needs to be increased to deal with a situation of, obviously, cesspools are not a good situation, But it comes down to that burden of proof that your cesspool is actually creating this situation to a level that constitutes a violation. And it's not easy to prove that, other than requiring a soil sample and tracking the groundwater from that cesspool to the nearest water body, and then saying, yep, it's definitely coming from this one, as opposed to all your neighbors, So it's tricky. It's definitely tricky, so.
One of the comments that I have, the memos that Meredith had sent that came from Glenn Harrington, I think the one was dated November 8th of 2021.
Yeah.
And it lists all of the ponds and how many systems there are within 300 feet, how many cesspools there are within 300 feet.
Right.
And then the number of cesspools within the 100 foot. And I consistently see this 59, and I hear it.
Yeah, I know, I saw that.
Yep.
Well, I'm not a math wizard, but I added up all those statistics. There's 43. So where are the others?
I saw that, yeah. Was there a good answer?
Coupled with that, Glenn specifically said that the only ones that were fully vetted are the ones in Santuit. The others are just listed. There could be more, there could be less.
Yeah, because I think that was
So-
the selectmen's mandate.
Did someone
Santuit
finally-
Pond is number one
Right.
for
So
getting
the
compliance.
numbers just don't add up.
Yeah.
And, not that it matters. I mean, all the cesspools need to come out at some point. We all know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would like to know, in terms of Santuit, there's, I believe, 8. I'd like to know more information about those 8. Where are they exactly
Where's the other
located?
29 and the other 13 don't add up?
Well, the 59, and I did it
know.
twice on my calculator. I get 43. No matter how I add it up, I get 43. So I don't know where they get 59. And obviously, there's more work that has to be done. I imagine Zach's going to inherit this and have to run with it.
Yeah.
So again, another good reason to have all of us sit down.
Excellent,
and start
exactly.
talking about these things. And
You're gonna get a
The
bunch
last
of smart
message we
people in the room,
want
and you're
is
gonna
for
come up with
the
some.
public to think that we're just turning our heads because we're too busy
Exactly.
conditioning the next house or the next dock or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that we're not busy, we are. But all of these things just need a lot more work.
Just procedurally, if we could just go back
Yeah.
to the endorsement,
Yes.
just to make sure that it's on the next agenda. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to table the endorsement for 2023 Maytown meeting, proposed article, horsepower restrictions on Sandfield Pond by the Mashpee Department of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Brian.
Good.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Thank you, Marjorie. Any further discussion? In terms of that, Drew, I would just ask again, I know we talked quickly before the meeting. Is that via email that she sent that request, or is that?
I think so. It was email.
It was, can you forward that out
Yes.
to everyone so that
Yeah.
everybody has a copy of that and they can see that? And
Yeah,
then we can bring it up at our next meeting.
Yeah. And you've got the signatures coming around. Sandy, don't sign those when they come around to you.
Okay, any other further discussion on that motion? Hearing none. Brian?
Yes.
Marjorie?
Yes, sir.
Aaron?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
I vote yes as well, so that
Is that it?
motion passes unanimously.
Goes over
and we'll
to-
take that up at the next meeting.
Okay, also, Mr. Chair, in the additional topics, that's at the chairman's purview, given what Drew just said about the water quality, I don't know how the commission feels or fellow commissioners, but I think that if we could take a motion to send a response to Ms. Kilpatrick, and maybe invite her to the next meeting. I think that the next meeting will also have those hearings, which should be interesting, on the 100 to the 150 feet. So I think that if we could at least, because I don't know if the correspondence should come from the agent, I wouldn't mind the response coming from the chair or the department, however it's worded, but I would feel comfortable with sending her a response to invite her to the next meeting, and just being mindful of, anytime we talk about anything, being mindful of the fact that, people should probably be here outside of their written comments, and especially some of the other situations that we've ran into with allegations of violation of open meeting laws and things. So
Sure.
just to err on the side of caution, I think it's best for us to invite, and then also give all of the public the information at the same time, since we'll have a captured audience.
Okay? Does that, that does not require a vote, does it?
Well, he made a motion. So,
Oh.
yeah, you made
Sorry.
it a motion.
Okay. Is there a second to
What
that?
was the motion, Brian?
The motion would be to send a response to Meredith
Oh, that's right.
Kilpatrick to invite her to the next meeting on February 9th.
I second.
Okay, second. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other discussion on that? Being none, Brian?
Yes.
Marjorie?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
I vote yes as well. Motion carries unanimously.
Great.
Is it in order now to just ask a question about the invitation, setting up the date first, having everybody in and how the invitation would go out and how you would all distribute it? Is that in order now, or how did you leave that? I can't remember. You were gonna find dates?
Oh, yeah, I was going to investigate dates for available meeting space rooms.
Okay.
As a separate meeting, or were we going to tack that on to the front end of our next meeting?
I think that was a suggestion moving forward by Brian, unless I'm mistaken, Brian, but for the purposes of
Yeah.
setting up a meeting for discussing water quality, it would be a separate.
Separate meeting.
Separate,
Okay.
And I
separate.
thought you two were going to kind of work that out.
Yeah, we're
and
gonna
come
work
back to
out-
that.
Just as long as we work it out.
Yeah.
And we all agreed that as soon as you've got a date or whatever, we'll move forward quickly, because I think
Yeah.
the invitation, if it comes from you and Paul or whatever as the chair,
Yep,
we should all too forward it on to all of our
Sure.
lists of folks who are in there and invite everybody, like,
Yeah.
try to push it out, because you got about 100 people to get 13 to show. That's my ratio.
So do you want to shoot for February 2nd?
Dan, are you also Stacy
no, you
tonight?
have to,
I have a meeting February
You carried the dual thing well.
do whatever I'm told. Well, we'll send me.
There you go, right?
Conflicts you have. Okay, that's
2nd. I
right,
voted
you,
no on that one.
I was
you-
actually
you
missing
didn't sign the
Alex
CLCs.
and Stacy. at the same time. I was like,
I'll send those.
I think they planned it.
Yeah, yeah. You voted no. on
Charlie, I don't mind
112
saying
waterway.
your visage is like the size of God. You know this? He's looking at me. Is he frozen? Charlie? You take up the whole wall. I'm being charming. Apparently, it's not charming you at all.
Not working.
You've been muted.
Yeah, no, that's a smile, I think. Yeah, okay.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, so we'll work out that date. I have a
Great.
conflict with
I just wanted to make sure before the meeting closed that
Yep,
we
absolutely.
had a plan.
Yes.
It's always good to have a plan.
Are there any other additional concerns, topics, questions, remarks, criticisms?
So,
I'll accept a motion to adjourn if there is one.
So moved at 8:14 PM.
Thank you, Brian. Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion to end this? Ms. Godfrey, no? No discussion? Brian?
Yes.
Marjorie?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
The minutes reflect
Well,
that I
yes
said
as
yes
well.
enthusiastically.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
See, he was listening.
Congratulations on your first meeting, too.
You
yeah.
made it through. I thought you would.
Oh, I
Thank you,
sent that
Charlie.
back to Stacy.
Right.
Well, I think
Night.
Sandra's mic.